Hello everyone and welcome back to 4FS Gaming, and I'm actually really excited about this video because it looks at my flat out favourite trooper in Battlefront 2. Coincidentally, this trooper is also really underrated. I think it's actually far better than people give him credit for. And it is of course the First Order Flame Trooper. I reckon he's a really damn good enforcer. In this video we're going to go over his stats and abilities in quite a lot of detail and try and draw out some tactics to use as we go along. So if you've been having trouble with the Flame Trooper or you think he's trash, hopefully this video will be able to help you out. Let's start with the basics of the Flame Trooper's health and movement. The Flame Trooper has 400 health as a base, and that's before any star cards. Now this can be increased up to 480 with the epic upgrade. Now 400 health is really solid. Remember that Wookiee warriors only start with 350, so the Flame Trooper is no doubt intended to be a tank and can take a lot of damage. The Flamer, by my estimate, regenerates his health naturally after a 5-second delay, at a rate of around 100 points every 3 seconds. Like the other Enforcer classes, the Flame Trooper is slightly slower than a standard trooper, but not by a huge margin. This applies both to his walking and sprinting speeds. As with most troopers, the Flamer is able to do a dodge roll, which is extremely useful for a class that relies so much on evasion in close range. As with all of the other reinforcements in this game, the Flamer is restricted to a third-person only view. Now although this does break immersion somewhat, it is actually really important for the Flame Trooper due to the nature of their weapon. It really shines when challenging enemies around corners, and as such, corner peeking in third-person view is an essential tactic. I recommend frequently crossing between your viewing shoulders when playing this class. It'll give you the best sense of what is happening around you so you can evade and attack when enemies are vulnerable. So that's the real basic stuff out of the way. Now we're going to have a look at the most interesting and the most difficult to understand part of the Flame Trooper's kit, and this is his D93 Incinerator. I really love this weapon. It fires a cone of fire in front of you, and any enemies within the fire will take damage. Here we can see the maximum range of the cone. I can't quite get Luke Skywalker. And here lies the greatest challenge when you use the Flame Trooper. Aside from his grenade, this is the maximum range at which you can damage an enemy. Yep, anything further away than a few meters from you is completely safe. On close inspection, we can also see that the Incinerator does less damage to hitboxes on the periphery of the cone, be they on the side or to the rear. For maximum damage, you want to fully immerse and enclose your target in the fire of the Incinerator. We'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a few moments. So let's talk damage. And the Flame Trooper does a lot of damage. My best estimate from going through footage frame by frame is that if you keep that flame on a target, you can expect to deal 175 points of damage per second. So next time you head down the beach for a barbecue, or a barbie as we say here in Australia, it'll only take 2 seconds with the Incinerator to serve up a well done Wookiee warrior, or 4 seconds to cook Luke Skywalker to your liking. Now of course that 175 damage per second is actually divided into 2 separate components. There is the raw damage from the Incinerator flame, and then there is the damage dealt by setting the target on fire. Yes, that's right, any enemy that gets even the slightest touch of flame will take damage for a short additional duration. What we are seeing here is a slow-mo close-up of a Wookiee health bar, as the Flame Trooper tries to cook him. The Incinerator is pulsed for just a 1 moment, dealing an initial 10 damage. And then the remaining 65 damage is dealt over the following 1.86 seconds. So clearly that much information is not really needed in order to use the Incinerator effectively. However, what we can take away is that if your opponent pulls out of range or escapes the Incinerator's cone, they will still die if they have less than 65 health at the point they escape the fire. This can help you secure some kills, but it should not be relied upon. So this means that merely licking opponents once with the flames and then retreating back to safety will not be a strong way to get kills. You actually need to keep the enemy in the flame until their health is low first. Another really interesting thing that I discovered was that the Incinerator does not actually fire a continual smooth stream of flame, but mechanically speaking it actually pulses very rapid bursts. As such, the damage is incremental. We can see this through close inspection of the overheat meter of the Incinerator, and I could actually feel it through my controller's vibration. Each pulse represented 1 vibration. Now remember this because it becomes important in a few minutes when we talk about the other abilities of the Flame Trooper. So let's do some damage calculations. Each of these little pulses deals 20 damage, and you can fire 40 of them before the incinerator overheats. It takes 7 seconds of continuous fire to overheat the incinerator. We now have all that we need to calculate the damage per second of the incinerator flame, which comes in at 115 damage per second, but the target is immersed in the flame. Now this is actually halved to 10 damage per tick if the target is on the outside edge of the cone of flame, be it to the side or to the outmost range. Okay, so that was a lot of numbers, so I'm going to run over a bit of a summary of what we know so far about the incinerator. Firstly, it deals damage in a cone. It deals 175 total damage per second. 115 points of that damage come from the actual flame. The rest is from a lingering burn effect that will continue for 1.86 seconds after the target leaves the flame. Enemies on the edges of the flame cone take half damage from the incinerator, but still take full damage from the lingering burn effect. Now this is where things can get really interesting. We're going to start to look at some of the secret abilities of the Flame Trooper and his incinerator. So you might look at the 175 damage per second and think, well, it's not massive. It is decent, but vanguards, snipers, and many other weapons in this game can match and exceed that when they get consistent headshots. And that's something that the incinerator can never do. So why is it do I think this weapon, and by extension this class, is just so good? Well, firstly, you don't have to actually aim the incinerator. Not really. As long as the enemy is in range, you can focus 100% of your attention on your movement and your dodging, still while dealing full damage. In addition, the incinerator flame blocks enemies' line of sight. It makes it that much harder for enemies to shoot you or any friendlies behind you when they can't see through your wall of flame. Thirdly, there is really no way to escape or block the flame unless you can get out of its range. You cannot evade it effectively with a roll, lightsaber heroes cannot block it at all, Yoda also can't absorb it with his block. And get this, the flame flat out ignores shields. Even Leia's squad shield cannot stop the burn. Nothing but a solid wall can protect the resistance from this guy. Finally, the incinerator has the ability to hit multiple enemies simultaneously. This is a pretty unique ability, and something that you should definitely be taking advantage of. Here is some footage of how scorching groups of enemies allows you to win fights that no other class could. Okay, so maybe a Wookiee could pull it off, but even then, you would need to have exceptional accuracy, which is something the Flame Trooper can flat out go without. And just when you thought the incinerator couldn't get any better, we have the Flame Trooper's central ability, which is Overload. Now at first glance, Overload looks pretty average. It has a duration of 9 seconds, during which you cannot sprint, but you can still roll. Unlike the Wookiee Warrior, you also maintain your normal walking speed. The Overload will mean your incinerator builds up no overheat charge. This allows for 16 seconds of continuous fire. The ability also has a cooldown of 15 seconds. But Overload actually modifies the weapon a fair bit more than just that. Remember that each Overload ability actually changes the Enforcer's primary fire mode, although how exactly it does this is not described. After some testing, we find that it actually increases the rate of fire of the incinerator. If you're holding a controller, you're going to notice that the vibration ticks occur much more rapidly. And after testing the damage, we can confirm this and conclude that the Overload actually ramps up the damage per second massively. From 175 normal DPS, it skyrockets to 250. Remember that these values include the residual burn damage. Overload will not alter the damage of each tick, nor will it change the size of the cone or the amount of residual burn damage, just the speed at which the ticks occur. So moral of the story is that Overload is pretty good. Just be aware that it does limit your movement, so get ready to cancel it early by re-tapping the buttons that you used to activate it. That's if you need to make a quick escape. Okay, so the only things left to cover now is the grenade and the Fortify ability. Let's first look at the Incendiary imploder. Now this is a nifty little grenade with a pretty short fuse, similar to that of a thermal detonator, and with a much shorter fuse than a thermal imploder. Be aware that it does have a punishingly long cooldown of 33 seconds, with no way to mitigate this, so you do need to use it tactically, and think carefully about each use, because they are rare. This grenade has an initial burst damage of 100, decreasing to the edges of its blast radius, which is not huge, but it can be increased up to 80% when applying star cards. After this, it spreads fire across the ground that will continue to burn for 6 seconds. dealing 20 damage per second to anything that remains in the fire. So as an offensive tool, the grenade does have limited utility. It requires enemies to remain within the burning area to actually kill them, but it does have other, more potent uses. Blanketing an objective with fire is a great way to pressure opponents. Good placements of the grenade can actually flush groups of enemies from behind cover, allowing you to burn them up with the Incinerator. Or the grenade can be used to finish a low health but high value target that is escaping your normal effective range. However, the best tactic I've discovered is to use the grenade to cover your escape from sticky situations. It will dissuade pursuit when you need to get away, so block a doorway, run away, and stay alive. Remember that you are also completely immune to the residual fire from your Incendiary imploder, but not that initial explosion damage. For interest's sake, here is a comparison of the imploder's blast radius with no star card, and with the epic radius increase star card. Now we only have one more ability to look at, and it is Fortify. This is the ability that keeps you alive. Activating Fortify will grant you 175 additional health. This health takes 1.2 seconds to build up, and it will remain until you either take enough damage to completely deplete it, or after 18 seconds when the Fortify effect naturally wears off. Note that when you take damage, the Fortify health will deplete first, so you will never die due to Fortify wearing off if you are on low health. Fortify has a cooldown of 22 seconds, so use it carefully. This ability is best used to make yourself tougher before you make a big play that will expose yourself, or as an emergency heal for when you are taking too much fire or need to out-tank a saber hero. Note that Fortify always adds a flat 175 to your health pool, and it is not affected by your total health, which can be changed by star cards. Now that we know everything there is to know about the Flame Trooper, we're going to quickly recap some tactics. I've gone over most of these throughout the analysis, but here we're just going to go over them again. Firstly, cover is your friend. You need to force fights at close range, and the only way to do this is to stick to cover and terrain. You need to make sure that your line of sight to the opponent is blocked right up until they are in range of your fire. This is probably the single most important thing to take away from this entire video, and I cannot really overstate its importance. Make sure that your opponent cannot shoot you until you get into range. Running at someone out in the open is flat out suicide with this character. Now to help you with this, you can take advantage of that third person view to outmaneuver your opponents. It's important to focus on movement and evasion, because you really don't need to aim. Positioning is everything. Just pull the trigger when enemies are close and they will end up dying. You also need to be careful with the overload ability. Although it is very strong for bringing down heavy enemies, it does make you unable to sprint. Use your flames to blind the enemy. It will make shooting you harder than you think if all they can see is fire. Another thing to remember is that although that grenade has great potential to deal damage against grouped enemies, consider keeping it in reserve to help cover a retreat or flush enemies out of cover. And finally, remember that you are the only class in the game that can bypass all defenses and kill multiple enemies at the same time with your primary weapon. For you, enemy squad shields are a bunch of free kills, and you can even team up with a friendly officer to create a dome of death that only you can shoot out of. And that right there brings us to the end of this video. Please let me know if you liked it and what you would like to see more of in the future. Thank you so much for watching. This is Ascendance from 4FS Gaming.